Hello friends, this video on Diversity in Living World part 11 is brought to you by examfear.com. No more fear from exam. So let us now talk about the taxonomical aids. So what is the meaning of the word aids? It means help, things which help us in doing something. So let us see what are the things that help us in this study of taxonomy. So how do we define taxonomical aids? They are basically collection of specimens of plant and animal species, which is essential and is the prime source of taxonomic studies. Now, so far you saw that we were talking about nomenclature, because of which we spoke about identification and we spoke about classification. Then we came to different categories, that is the different taxa, and we talked about taxonomy. Now, have you ever thought that how are we actually going to put organisms into those categories? So for that, we actually need to have some specimen of that organism, right? So in order to help us in determining or in identifying a new organism, what do? We keep a record of specimen of the existing plant and animal species. So what happens whenever we find a new organism, we can match it with any of the existing species. So if it matches with one of them, so we can group it with that particular species. So keeping those specimens will actually help us in these studies of taxonomy. So now the question is, how do we collect or how do we retain these specimens? Because there will be so many specimens, right? So how do we actually maintain them and where do we actually keep them? So there are a couple of ways or couple of techniques which actually help us in maintaining these specimens. So some of the taxonomical aids. Now, procedures and techniques to store and preserve the information as well as the specimens. So as I said, we have a specific process. We have some specific areas which are only for maintaining those specimens. So now some of the examples of taxonomical aids are herbarium, botanical garden, museum, and zoological park, which are also known as zoos. So these are some of the techniques which actually help us in preserving the plant and animal species or the plant and animal specimen. Now let us quickly talk about each of these taxonomical aids in detail. So first we'll talk about herbarium. Have you ever heard of a herbarium? What is a herbarium? The word herb, it comes from the plant, right? The small short plants are known as herbs. So what's a herbarium? It is a storehouse of collected plant specimens that are dried, pressed and preserved on sheets. So that means what do we do? Let me take a small example. Have you ever seen that if you pluck a flower and if you keep it between the pages of your book, and if that flower remains inside your book for a long time, maybe over a period of 6 months, what happens? That flower gets dried and it gets pressed between the sheets of the book and it becomes very dry and it gets pressed and it becomes like a paper. That's how it happens. So in herbarium also we do the same thing. We take plant specimens, we dry them, we press them, and then we paste them on sheets and we keep those sheets in a properly maintained manner. Now on those sheets, now let us suppose there are so many varieties of plants, right? So if we just keep on taking specimens and keep them pasting on sheets, that is not going to help us. That maybe today we collected a specimen and if we want to know about something about that specimen after 10 years, do you think we will remember what it was? We will not, right? So what do? We maintain on those sheets where we have pasted that specimen, there we maintain or record each and every detail about that specimen. For example, the date of collection, the place from where that specimen was collected, what exactly that particular specimen is. That means the family it belongs to, the species, the genus. So its biological classification should be maintained on that sheet, so that whenever, now like this, you will have thousands and thousands of specimens, right? but everything is there on a sheet of paper. So now let us suppose you found something new, a new plant species is found. So what do? You want to, when you see it, you want to match it with some existing species. So you can quickly go and you can refer all the things that you have in your herbarium, and you can match it and you can check if it matches with any of the existing one for similarities. So this is how a herbarium looks like. So here you can see you have got sheets of paper on which the specimens the dried specimen have been pasted, and also their description is written here, and then they keep these specimens in separate blocks. Like it'll be like a building inside which you have different wardrobes or different drawers for different species. So that way it is maintained very in a very proper manner and in a regulated manner. So that is the herbarium. Next is the botanical garden. I'm sure many of you would have visited gardens, the normal gardens where you have greenery all around, you have parks to play around and things like that. But have you ever visited a botanical garden? What's a botanical garden? So even there you have a lot of plants all around. But there you would have observed, if you have ever been to a botanical garden, you would have seen that those plants will have labels on them. So that those labels will say what is the scientific name of that plant, to which family the plant belongs to. So it will have that also. So in botanical garden, we do not have a dried species of a plant. We have the live plant itself. So in that particular area, we dedicate that area to plant more and more new varieties of plant, and we maintain a record of each of them wherever they are planted. So these are collection of living plants. So that is the difference between a herbarium and botanical garden. In botanical garden, we have living plants, and in herbarium, we have dried plants. So these living plants act as a reference. So this is the picture of a botanical garden in India. So here if you look at this garden, you have a variety of plants there, and if you observe it very closely, you will see that beside each plant you have a label which tells about the binomial name of that plant, the family it belongs to, and some of the important things about that plant. So you get an idea about how that plant looks, you get an idea about the appearance of that plant, the classification of that plant, so that again if you get a new species somewhat similar to that, so you can get an idea about how you can classify that new species, right? Okay, the next one is the museum. We all know what a museum is. So it basically is a collection of preserved plant and animal specimens for study and reference. So it is again a building which is for this purpose, that we can preserve plant specimens as well as animal specimens, so that we can refer them as and when needed. So here is an example of a museum which preserves the animal specimens. So how do they preserve it? Most of the times it is seen that they preserve a dead animal. For example, if you have a dead insect, so how are you going to preserve it? So if you just keep it like this, it will get dried and it will get decomposed over a period of time. So how are you going to preserve it? So what do? They take jars, and inside those jars they put some chemical. So in that chemical they keep that specimen. So that the purpose of that chemical is to preserve that specimen, right? So that is the way of preserving the animal specimens. And then over each, so here in this picture you can see that over each jar you have a label. So that label will tell the binomial name of that animal, the family it belongs to, or some of the important characteristics will be described over that jar. So this is how the plant and animal specimens are preserved in a museum. And the last one is a zoological park. So here again we have living animals. So these are the areas where wild animals are kept in protected environments under human care. So when we were kids, we all were very fond of visiting zoo, right? So whenever we have a holiday, we generally go for an outing with our family members to a zoo. So what do we see in the zoo? We see a variety of animals there, right? So normally when we stay in our locality, there are a couple of animals which we could see around us. For example, some of the birds, cat, dogs. So all these things we can see around us. But when you talk about wild animals, that means animals who can survive only in forests, like lions, tigers, elephants. We do not see them around us, right? So these kind of animals are kept in a protected environment. I'm sure I do not need to explain you what a zoo is. Inside the zoo, they maintain an environment very similar to what the wild animals are used to, and then they provide them food on a timely basis. So these zoos also help us to understand a lot of things about different animals, their food habits, their behavior, their life cycle. So we get to know so many things about the animals even in a zoological park. So the zoos are also a very important taxonomical aid. So there the environment is made very similar to the natural habitats of those animals. So we have different varieties of animals inside the zoo. So these were some of the taxonomical aids which actually help us in understanding or help us in identifying different varieties of life forms. So with this, we have reached towards the end of this lesson, diversity in living world. So let us look at some of the questions. Thank you. Please visit www.examfear.com to watch more videos, attempt free online test, get free study material, find tutors and mentors. Thank you once again.